Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring Mad Science, Volume 2. The Ultimate Experiment by Thornton, DeKy. February Strawberries by Jim Harmon. How Deep the Grooves by Philip José Farmer. The Builders by Fox B. Holden. The Maugham Obsession by August Derleth. The Ultimate Experiment by Thornton, DeKy, originally published in Comet, July 1941. Narrated by Tom Trussel. They were all gone now, the masters, all dead, and their atoms scattered to the never-ceasing winds that swept the great chrysolite city towers in ever-increasing fury. That had been the last wish of each as he had passed away, dying from sheer old age. True, they had fought on as long as they could to save their kind from utter extinction, but the comet that had trailed its poisoning wake across space to leave behind it upon Earth a noxious, lethal gas vapor had done its work too well. No living soul breathed upon the earth. No one lived here now but Chiron and his kind. And, so thought Chiron to himself, he might as well be a great unthinking robot able to do only one thing instead of the mental giant he was, so obsessed had he become with the task he had set himself to do. Yet, in spite of a great loneliness and a strong fear of a final frustration, he worked on with the others of his people, hardly stopping for anything except the very necessities needed to keep his big body working in perfect coordination. Tirelessly he worked, for the masters had bred, if that is the word to use, fatigue and the need for restoration out of his race long decades ago. Sometimes, though, he would stop his work when the great red dying sun began to fade into the west, and his round eyes would grow wistful as he looked out over the great city that stretched in towering minarets and lofty spires of purest crystal blue for miles on every side. A fairy city of rarest hue and beauty, a city for the gods, and the gods were dead. Chiron felt, at such times, the great loneliness that the last master must have known. They had been kind, the masters, and Chiron knew that his people, as they went about their eternal tasks of keeping the great city in perfect shape for the masters who no longer needed it, must miss them as he did. Never to hear their voices ringing, never to see them again gathered in groups to witness some game or to play amid the silver fountains and flowery gardens of the wondrous city, made him infinitely saddened. It would always be like this, unless... But thinking, dreaming, reminiscing would not bring it all back, for there was only one answer to still the longing: work. The others worked and did not dream, but instead kept busy tending to the 1,001 tasks the masters had set them to do, had left them doing when the last master perished. He too must remember the trust they had placed in his hands and fulfill it as best he could. From the time the great red eye of the sun opened itself in the east until it disappeared in the blue haze beyond the chrysolite city, Chiron laboured with his fellows. Then, at the appointed hour, the musical signals would peal forth their sweet, sad chimes, whispering good night to ears that would hear them no more, and all operations would halt for the night, just as it had done when the masters were here to supervise it. Then, when morning came, he would start once more trying, testing, experimenting with his chemicals and plastics, forever following labyrinth of knowledge, seeking for the great triumph that would make the work of the others of some real use. His hands moulded the materials carefully, lovingly, to a pattern that was set in his mind as a thing to cherish. Day by day his experiments in the liquid baths took form under his careful modelling. He mixed his chemicals with the same loving touch, the same careful concentration and painstaking thoroughness, studying often his notes and analysis charts. Everything must be just so, lest his experiment not turn out perfectly. He never became exasperated at a failure or a defect that proved to be the only reward for his faithful endeavours, but worked patiently on toward a goal that he knew would ultimately be his. Then, one day, as the great red sun glowed like an immense red eye overhead, Chiron stepped back to admire his handiwork. In that instant, the entire wondrous city seemed to breathe a silent prayer as he stood transfixed by the sight before him. Then it went on as usual, hurrying noiselessly about its business. The surface cars, empty though they were, fled swiftly about, supported only by the rings of magnetic force that held them to their designated paths. The gravoships raised from the tower dromes to speed silently into the eye of the red sun that was dying. No one now, Chiron thought to himself as he studied his handiwork. Then he walked unhurriedly to the cabinet in the laboratory corner, and took from it a pair of earphones resembling those of a long-forgotten radio set. Just as unhurriedly, though his mind was filled with turmoil and his being with excitement, he walked back and connected the earphones to the box upon his bench. The phones dangled into the liquid bath before him as he adjusted them to suit his requirements. Slowly, he checked over every step of his experiments before he went farther. Then, as he proved them for the last time, his hand went slowly to the small knife switch upon the box at his elbow. Next, he threw into connection the larger switch upon his laboratory wall, bringing into his laboratory the broadcast power of the chrysolite city. The laboratory generators hummed softly, drowning out the quiet hum of the city outside. As they built up, sending tiny living electrical impulses over the wires like minute currents that come from the brain, Chiron sat breathless, his eyes intent. Closer to his work he bent, watching lovingly, fearful lest all might not be quite right. Then his eyes took on a brighter light as he began to see the reaction. He knew the messages that he had sent out were being received and coordinated into a unit that would stir and grow into intellect. Suddenly the machine flashed its little warning red light and automatically snapped off. Chiron twisted quickly in his seat and threw home the final switch. This, he knew, was the ultimate test. On the results of the flood of energy impulses that he had set in motion rested the fulfillment of his success or failure. He watched with slight misgivings. This had never been accomplished before. How could it possibly be a success now? Even the masters had never quite succeeded at this final test. How could he, only a servant? Yet it must work, for he had no desire in life but to make it work. Then, suddenly, he was on his feet, eyes wide. From the two long coffin-like liquid baths there arose two perfect specimens of the Homo sapiens. Man and woman they were, and they blinked their eyes in the light of the noonday sun, raised themselves dripping from the baths of their creation, and stepped to the floor before Chiron. The man spoke, the woman remained silent. "I am Adam too," he said, created by you, Chiron, from a formula they left in their image. I was created to be a master, and she whom you also have created is to be my wife. We shall mate, and the race of man shall be reborn through us and others whom I shall help you create. The man halted at the last declaration he intoned, and walked smilingly toward the woman who stepped into his open arms, returning his smile. Chiron smiled too within his pumping heart. The words the man had intoned had been placed in his still pregnable mind by the teleteach tones, and record that the last master had prepared before death had halted his experiments. The actions of the man toward the woman, Chiron knew, was caused by the natural constituents that went to form his chemical body and govern his humanness. He, Chiron, had created a living man and woman. The masters lived again because of him. They would sing and play, and again people the magnificent chrysolite city, because he loved them, and had kept on until success had been his. But then why not such a turnabout? Hadn't they, the masters, created him a superb, thinking robot? The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. February Strawberries by Jim Harmon, originally published in Worlds of If, March 1961. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Linton laid down his steel fork beside the massively solid transparency of the restaurant water glass. "Isn't that Roger Sneed at that table?" he heard himself say stupidly. Howell, the man across the table from him, looked embarrassed without looking. "Not at all. Somebody who looks like him. Twin brother, you know how it is. Sneed's dead, don't you remember?" Linton remembered. Howell had to know that he would remember. What were they trying to pull on him? "The man who isn't Sneed is leaving," Linton said, describing the scene over Howell's shoulder. "If that's Sneed's brother, I might catch him to pay my respects." "No," Howell said. "I wouldn't do that." "Sneed came to Greta's funeral. It's the least I could do." "I wouldn't. Probably no relation to Sneed at all. Somebody who looks like him." "He's practically running," Linton said. "He almost ran out of the restaurant." "Who? Oh, the man who looked like Sneed, you mean?" "Yes," Linton said. A thick-bodied man at the next table leaned his groaning chair back intimately against Linton's own chair. "That fellow who just left looked like a friend of yours, huh?" the thick man said. "Couldn't have been him, though," Linton answered automatically. "My friend's dead." The thick man rocked forward and came down on all 6 feet. He threw paper money on the table as if he were disgusted with it. He plodded out of the place quickly. Howell breathed in deeply and sucked back Linton's attention. "Now you've probably got old Sneed into trouble." "Sneed's dead," Linton said. "Oh, well, dead," Howell replied. "What do you say it like that for?" Linton demanded angrily. "The man's dead. Plain dead. He's not Sherlock Holmes or the Frankenstein monster. There's no doubt or semantic leeway to the thing." "You know how it is," Howell said. Linton had thought he had known how death was. He had buried his wife, or rather, he had watched the 2 workmen scoop and shove dirt into the sawdust-fresh pine box that held the coffin. He had known what he sincerely felt to be a genuine affection for Greta. Even after they had let him out of the asylum as cured, he still secretly believed he had known a genuine affection for her. But it didn't seem he knew about death at all. Linton felt that his silence was asking Howell by this time. "I don't know, mind you," Howell said, puffing out tobacco smoke, "but I suppose he might have been resurrected." Who by? Linton asked, thinking. God? The Mafia, I guess. Who knows who runs it? You mean somebody has invented a way to bring dead people back to life? Linton said. He knew, of course, that Howell did not mean that. Howell meant that some people had a system of making it appear that a person had died in order to gain some illegal advantage. But by saying something so patently ridiculous, Linton hoped to bring the contradicting truth to the surface immediately. An invention? I guess that's how it is, Howell agreed. I don't know much about people like that. I'm an honest businessman. But it's wonderful, Linton said, thinking his immediate thoughts. Wonderful. Why should a thing like that be illegal? Why don't I know about it? Shh, Howell said uneasily. This is a public place. I don't understand, Linton said helplessly. Look, Frank, you can't legalize a thing like resurrection, Howell said with feigned patience. There are strong religious convictions to consider. The undertakers have a lobby. I've heard they've got spies right in the White House, ready to assassinate if they have to. Death is their whole life. You've got to realize that. That's not enough. Not nearly enough. Think of all the problems it would cause. Insurance, for one thing. Overpopulation. Birth control is a touchy subject. They'd have to take it up if everybody got resurrected when they died, wouldn't they? But what do they do about it? Against it? There are a lot of fakes and quacks in the resurrection business. When the cops find out about a place, they break in, smash all the equipment, and arrest everybody in sight. That's about all they can do. The charges, if any, come under general vice classification. I don't understand, Linton complained. Why haven't I heard about it? They didn't talk much about white slavery in Victorian England. I read an article in Time the other day that said death was our dirty word, not sex. You want to shock somebody, you tell him, you're going to be dead someday. Not anything sexual. You know how it is. The opposite of live these days is videotaped. I see, Linton said. He tried to assimilate it. Of course he had, he reminded himself, been out of touch for some time. It might be true. Then again, they might be trying to trick him. They used to do that to see if he was really well, but the temptation was too strong. Tell me, Howell, where could I find a resurrectionist? Howell looked away. Frank, I don't have anything to do with that kind of people, and if you're smart, you'll not either. Linton's fingers imprinted the linen. Damn you, Howell, you tell me. Howell climbed to his feet hurriedly. I'll take you out to dinner to console you over the loss of your wife half a year ago, and to make you feel welcome back to society of your fellows after being in the hospital for a nervous breakdown. I do all that, and for thanks you yell at me and curse me. You cooks are all alike. Howell threw money on the table with the same kind of disinterest as a thick-set man and stalked out. I've got to hurry too, Linton thought. It's Resurrection Day. The doctor fluttered his hands and chirped about the office. Well, well, Mr. Linton, we understand you've been causing disturbances. Not really, Linton said modestly. Come, come, the doctor chided. You started riots in 2 places, attempted to bribe an officer. That's disturbing, Mr. Linton. Very disturbing. I was only trying to find out something, Linton maintained. They could have told me. Everybody seems to know but me. The doctor clucked his tongue. Let's not think any such thing. People don't know more than you do. Linton rubbed his shoulder. That cop knew more about judo holds than I did. A few specific people know a few specific things you don't. But let me ask you, Mr. Linton, could Einstein bake a pie? I don't know. Who the hell ever wasted Einstein's time asking him a thing like that? People who want to know the answers to questions have to ask them. You can find out anything by asking the right questions of the right person at the right time. Linton stared suspiciously. Do you know where I can find a resurrectionist? I am a resurrectionist. But the policeman brought me to you. Well, that's what you paid him to do, wasn't it? Did you think a policeman would just steal your money? Cynics. All you young people are cynics. Linton scooted forward on the insultingly cold metal chair and really looked at the doctor for the first time. Doctor, can you really resurrect the dead? Will you stop being cynical? Of course I can. Doctor, I'm beginning to believe in you, Linton said. But tell me, can you resurrect the long dead? Size has nothing to do with it. No, my wife has been dead a long time, months. Months? The doctor snapped those weeks away with his fingers. It could be years, centuries. It's all mathematics, my boy. I need only one fragment of the body, and my computers can compute what the rest of it was like and recreate it. It's infallible. Naturally, there is a degree of risk involved. Infallible risk, yes, Linton murmured. Could you go to work right away? First, I must follow an ancient medical practice. I must bleed you. Linton grasped the situation immediately. You mean you want money? You realize I've just got out of an institution. I've often been in institutions myself, for alcoholism, narcotics addiction, and more. What a wonderful professional career, Linton said when he couldn't care less. Oh, yes, indeed, but I didn't come out broke. Neither did I, Linton said hastily. I invested in shifty stocks, faltering bonds, and while I was away they sank to rock bottom. Then? When they hit rock bottom, they bounced up. If I hadn't found you, I would have been secure for the rest of my lonely, miserable life. All that's ended now, the doctor assured him. Now we must go dig up the corpse. The female corpse, eh? Resurrection Day. Doctor, Linton whispered, my mind is singing with battalions of choirs. I hope that doesn't sound irreverent to you. The doctor stroked his oily palms together. Oh, but it does. Beautifully. The certificate to allow reburial in Virginia hadn't been impossible to obtain. The doctor had taken the body and Linton's fortune and fed them both into the maw of his calculators, and by means of the secret, smuggled formulae, Greta would be cybernetically reborn. Linton shook his head. It seemed impossible. But Greta opened the olive-drab slab of metal of the door to the doctor's inner sanctum and walked out into the medicinal cold fluorescent lighting. It wasn't fair at all, Linton thought. He should have had some time to prepare himself. Greta lifted her arms, stretching the white smock over the lines of her body. "Darling," she said. "Greta," he said, feeling a slight revulsion, but repressing it. No doubt he would be able to adjust to her once having been dead, the same way he had learned to accept the, to him, distasteful duty of kissing her ears the way she enjoyed. Greta swirled across the room and folded her arms across his shoulders. She kissed his cheek. "It's so wonderful to be back. This calls for a celebration. We must see Nancy, Oscar, Johnny, all our old friends." "Yes," he said, his heart lurching for her sad ignorance. "But tell me, how was it being away?" The curves and angles of her flesh changed their position against his ivy dacron. Her attitude altered. "I can't remember," she said. "I can't really remember anything. Not really. My memories are ghosts." Now, Linton said. "We mustn't get excited. You've been through a trial." She accepted the verdict. She pulled away and touched at her hair. It was the same hair, black as evil, contrasting with her inner purity. Of course it would be. It hadn't changed, even in the grave. He remembered the snaky tendrils of it growing out of the water-logged casket. "I must see all our old friends," Greta persisted. "Helen and Johnny." "My darling," he said gently. "About Johnny." Her fine black brows made Gothic arches. "Yes? What about Johnny?" It was a terrible accident right after. That is, about 5 months ago. He was killed." "Killed?" Greta repeated blankly. "Johnny Gorman was killed?" "Traffic accident. Killed instantly." "But Johnny was your friend, your best friend. Why didn't you have him resurrected the same way you did me?" "Darling, resurrection is a risky business and an expensive one. You have to pay premium prices for strawberries in February. I no longer have the money to pay for a resurrection of Johnny." Greta turned back to him. "It's just as well. You shouldn't bring back Johnny to this stream of life. Give him a ghost of mind and the photograph of a soul. It's monstrous. No one should do that." "No one. But you're sure you haven't the money to do it?" "No," Linton said. "I'm sold out. I've borrowed on my insurance to the hilt. It won't pay any more until I'm buried, and then, of course, you can resurrect me." "Of course," Greta said. She sighed. "Poor Johnny. He was such a good friend of yours. You must miss him. I'm so sorry for you." "I have you," he said with great simplicity. "Frank," she said, "you should see that place in there. There are foaming acid baths, great whale-toothed disposals, barrels of chemicals to quench death and smother decay. It's perfect." "It sounds carnal," he said uneasily. "No, dear, it's perfect for some things that have to be done." Her eyes flashed around the doctor's office and settled somewhere on something. Linton followed the direction of Greta's gaze and found only an ashtray stand looking vaguely like a fanatic's idol to a heathen religion on a pedestal. Greta pounced on the stand, hefted it at the base, and ran toward him with it over her head. Linton leapt aside, and Greta hit the edge of the desk instead of him. "Brain damage," he concluded nervously. "Cell deterioration." Greta raised it again, and he caught her wrists high over her head. She writhed against him provocatively. "Frank, I'm sorry, dear, but I have to have that insurance money. It's hell." Linton understood immediately. He felt foolish, humiliated. All that money. He had resurrected a gold ring that had turned his knuckles green. No one must ever know. Linton twisted the stand away from his wife and watched her face in some appalled form of satisfaction as it registered horror and acceptance of the crumpled metal disc falling toward it. He split her head open and watched her float to the floor. Linton was surprised at the fine wire mesh just below the skin and those shiny little tabs that looked like pictures of transistors in institutional advertising. He knelt beside the body and poked into the bleeding, smouldering wreckage. Yes, it seemed they had to automate and modify the body somewhat in resurrection. They couldn't chemically revive the old corpse like pouring water on a wilted geranium. Or did they use the old bodies at all? What were all those acid baths for if the bodies were used? Didn't the resurrections just destroy the old corpses and make androids, synthetic creatures, to take their place? But it didn't matter. Not a bit. She had thought she was his wife, sharing her viewpoint down to the finest detail, and he had thought she was his wife. It was what you thought was real that made it so, not the other way round. "I've killed my wife," Linton called, rising from his knees, stretching his hands out to something. The pain stung him to sleep, a pain in his neck, like a needle that left a hole big enough for a camel to pass through, and big enough for him to follow the camel in his turn. He opened his eyes to the doctor's spotless, well-ordered office. The doctor looked down at him consolingly. "You'll have to go back, Mr. Linton, but they'll cure you. You'll be cured of ever thinking your wife was brought back to life, and that you killed her all over again." "Do you really think so, Doctor?" Linton asked, hopefully. The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. How Deep the Grooves by Philip José Farmer. Originally published in Amazing Stories, February 1963. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Always in control of himself, Dr. James Carrode lowered his voice. He said, "You will submit to this test. We must impress the secretary. The fact that we're willing to use our own unborn baby in the experiment will make that impression a deeper one." Dr. Jane Carrode, his wife, looked up from the chair in which she sat. Her gaze swept over the tall, lean figure in the white scientist's uniform, and the 2 rows of resplendent ribbons and medals on his left chest. She glared into the eyes of her husband. Scornfully, she said, "You did not want this baby. I did, though I wonder why. Perhaps because I wanted to be a mother, no matter what the price. Not to give the state another citizen. But now we're going to have it. You want to exploit it even before it's born, just as—" Harshly, he said, "Don't you know what such talk can lead to?" "Don't worry. I won't tell anyone you didn't desire to add to the state, nor will I tell anybody how I induced you to have it." His face became red, and he said, "You will never again mention that to me. Never again, understand?" Jane's neck muscles trembled, but her face was composed. She said, "I'll speak of that to you whenever I feel like it, though God knows I'm thoroughly ashamed of it. But I do get a certain sour satisfaction out of knowing that, once in my life, I managed to break down that rigid self-control. I made you act like a normal man, one able to forget himself in his passion for a woman. Dr. Carrode, the great scientist of the state, really forgot himself then." She gave a short, brittle laugh, and then settled back in the chair as if she would no longer discuss the matter. But he would not, could not, let her have the last word. He said, "I only wanted to see how it felt to throw off all restraints. That was all. An experiment. I didn't care for it. It was disgusting. It'll never happen again." He looked at his wristwatch and said, "Let's go. We must not make the secretary wait." She rose slowly, as if the 8 months' burden was at last beginning to drain her strength. "All right, but I'm submitted our baby to this experiment only under protest. If anything happens to it, a potential citizen—" He spun around. "A written protest?" "I've already sent it in." "You little fool! Do you want to wreck everything I've worked for?" Tears filled her eyes. "James, does the possible harm to our baby mean nothing to you? Only the medals, the promotions, the power?" "Nonsense! There's no danger. If there were, wouldn't I know it? Come along now." But she did not follow him through the door. Instead, she stood with her face against the wall, her shoulders shaking. A moment later, Jason Kramer entered. The young man closed the door behind him and put his arm around her. Without protest, she turned and buried her face in his chest. For a while she could not talk, but could only weep. Finally she released herself from his embrace and said, "Why is it, Jason, that every time I need a man to cry against, James is not with me, but you are?" "Because he is the one who makes you cry," he said, "and I love you." "And James," she said, "loves only himself." "You didn't give me the proper response, Jane. I said I loved you." She kissed him, though lightly, and murmured, "I think I love you, but I'm not allowed to. Please forget what I said. I mean it." She walked away from him. Jason Kramer, after making sure that he had no lipstick on his face or uniform, followed her. Entering the laboratory, Jane Carrode ignored her husband's glare and sat down in the chair in the middle of the room. Immediately thereafter, the Secretary of Science and 2 security bodyguards entered. The secretary was a stocky, dark man of about 50. He had very thick black eyebrows that looked like pieces of fur pasted above his eyes. He radiated the assurance that he was master, in control of all in the room. Yet he did not, as was nervously expected by James Carrode and Jason Kramer, take offence because Jane did not rise from the chair to greet him. He gave her a smile, patted her hand, and said, "Is it true you will bear a male baby?" "That is what the tests indicate," she said. "Good. Another valuable citizen. A scientist, perhaps, with its genetic background." Annoyed because his wife had occupied the centre of the stage for too long, Dr. James Carrode loudly cleared his throat. He said, "Citizens, honoured secretary, I've asked you here for a demonstration because I believe that what I have to show you is of utmost importance to the state's future. I have here the secret of what constitutes a good or bad citizen of the state." He paused for effect, which he was getting, and then continued, "As you know, I, and my associates, of course, have perfected an infallible and swift method whereby an enemy spy or deviationist citizen may be unmasked. This method has been in use for 3 years. During that time it has exposed many thousands as espionage agents, as traitors, as potential traitors." The secretary looked interested. He also looked at his wristwatch. Dr. Carrode refused to notice. He talked on at the same pace. He could justify any amount of time he took, and he intended to use as much as possible. "My department of electroencephalographic research first produced the devices delicate enough to detect the so-called row waves emanated by the human brain, the row or semantic waves. After 10 years of hard work, I correlated the action of the row waves in a particular human brain with the action of the individual's voice mechanisms. That meant, of course, that we had a device which mankind has long dreamed of. Pardon the term, mind-reading machine." Carrode purposely avoided scientific terminology. The secretary did have a Ph.D. in political science, but he knew very little of any biological science. Jason Kramer, at a snap of the fingers by Carrode, wheeled a large, round, shining machine to a spot about 2 feet in front of Jane. It resembled a weird metallic antelope, for it had a long, flexible neck at the end of which was an oval and eyeless head with 2 prongs like horns. These pointed at Jane's skull. On the side of the machine, Service 3, was a round glass tube, the oscilloscope. Carrode said, "We no longer have to attach electrodes to the subject's head. We've made that method obsolete. Service's prongs pick up row waves without direct contact. It is also able to cut out 99.99% of the noise that has hampered us in a previous research." "Yes," thought Jane, "and why don't you tell them that it was Jason Kramer who made that possible instead of allowing them to think it was you?" At that moment she reached the peak of her hate for him. She wished that the swelling sleeper within her was not Carrode's, but Kramer's. And wishing that, she knew that she must be falling in love with Kramer. Carrode's voice slashed into her thoughts. "And so, using the detected row waves, which can be matched against definite objective words, we got a verbal picture of what is going on in the subject's mind at the conscious level." He gave an order to Kramer, and Kramer twisted a dial on the small control board on the side of Service. "The machine is now set for semantic relations," Carrode said. "Jane," he added so sharply that she was startled, "repeat this sentence after me, silently." He then gave her a much-quoted phrase from one of the speeches of the secretary himself. She repressed her scorn of him because of his flattery and dutifully concentrated on thinking the phrase. At the same time, she was aware that her tongue was moving in a noiseless lockstep with the thoughts. The round tube on the side of the service glowed, and then began flashing with many twisting threads of light. "The trained eye," said Carrod, "can interpret those waveforms. But we have a surprise for you to whom the patterns are meaningless. We have perfected a means whereby a technician with a minimum of training may operate service." He snapped his fingers. Kramer shot him a look. His face was expressionless, but Jane knew that Kramer resented Carrod's arrogance. Nevertheless, Kramer obeyed. He adjusted a dial, pushed down on a toggle switch, rotated another dial. A voice, tonelessly and tinnily mechanical, issued from a loudspeaker beneath the tube. It repeated the phrase that Carrod had given, and that Jane was thinking. It continued the repetition until Kramer, at another finger snap from Carrod, flicked the toggle switch upward. "As you have just heard," said Carrod triumphantly, "we have converted the waveforms into audible representations of what the subject is thinking." The secretary's brows rose like two caterpillars facing each other, and he said, "Very impressive." But he managed to give the impression that he was thinking. "Is that all?" Carrod smiled. He said, "I have much more. Something that, I'm sure, will please you very much. Now, as you know, this machine, my service, is exposing hundreds of deviationists and enemy agents every year. Yet, this is nothing." He stared fiercely at them, but had a slight smile on the corners of his lips. Jane, knowing him so well, could feel the radiance of his pride at the fact that the secretary was leaning forward and his mouth was open. "I say this is nothing. Catching traitors after they have become deviationists is locking the garage after the car's been stolen. What if we had a system of control whereby our citizens would be unable to be anything but unquestioningly loyal to the state?" The secretary said, "Ah!" "I knew you would be far from indifferent," said Carrod. Carrod pointed a finger downwards. Kramer, slowly, his jaws set, twisted the flexible neck of Service so that the pronged head pointed directly at James's distended stomach. He adjusted controls on the board. Immediately the oscilloscope danced with many intricate figures that were so different from the previous forms that even the untutored eyes of the secretary could perceive this change. "Citizens," said Carrod, "for some time after we discovered the row waves in the adult and infant, we searched for their presence in the brain of the unborn child. We had no success for a long time. But that was not because the row waves did not exist in the embryo. No, it was because we did not have delicate enough instruments. However, a few weeks ago, we succeeded in building one. I experimented upon my unborn child, and I detected weak traces of the row waves. Thus, I demonstrated that the ability to form words is present, though in undeveloped form, even in the 8-month embryo. You're probably wondering what this means. This knowledge does not enable us to make the infant or the unborn speak any sooner. True. But what it does allow us to do is—" Jane, who had been getting more tense with every word, became rigid. Would he allow this to be done to his own son, his own flesh and blood? Would he permit his child to become a half-robot, an obedient slave to the state, incapable in certain fields of wielding the power of free will? The factor that most marked men from the beasts and the machine. Numbly, she knew he would. To probe well-defined areas in the undeveloped mind and there to stamp into it certain inhibitory paths. These inhibitions, preconditioned reflexes, as it were, will not, of course, take effect until the child has learned a language, and developed the concepts of citizen and state. But once that is done, the correlation between the semantic waves and the inhibitions is such that the subject is unable to harbour any doubts about the teachings of the state, or those who interpret the will of the state for its citizens. It is not necessary to perform any direct or physical surgery upon the unborn. The reflexes will be installed by Service 3 within a few minutes, As you see, service cannot only receive, it can also transmit. Place a recording inside that receptacle beneath the speaker. Actuate it, and in short time you have traced in the grooves of the brain, if you will pardon an unscientific comparison, the voice of the state. There was a silence. Jane and Kramer were unsuccessful in hiding their repulsion, but the others did not notice them. The secretary and his bodyguards were staring at Carroad. After several minutes, the secretary broke the silence. "Dr. Carroad, are you sure that this treatment will not harm the creative abilities of the child? After all, we might make a first-class citizen, in the political sense, out of your child, yet we might wreck his potentialities as a first-class scientist. If we do that to our children, we lose out in the technological race, not to mention the military. We need great generals, too." "Absolutely not," replied Carroad, so loudly and flatly that the secretary was taken aback. "My computations, rechecked at least a dozen times, show there is no danger whatsoever. The only part of the brain affected, a very small area, has nothing to do with the creative functions. To convince you, I'm going to perform the first operation upon my own son. Surely I could do nothing more persuasive than that." "Yes," said the secretary, stroking his massive chin. "By the way, can this be done also to the adult?" "Unfortunately, no," said Carroad. "Then we will have to wait a number of years to determine if your theory is correct, and if we go ahead on the assumption that the theory is correct, and treat every unborn child in the country, we will have spent a tremendous amount of money and time. If you are not correct—" "I can't be wrong," said Carroad. His face began to flush, and he shook. Then suddenly his face was its normal colour, and he was smiling. Always in control, thought Jane, of himself, and if circumstances would allow, of everybody. "We don't have to build any extra machines," said Carroad. "A certain amount will be built anyway to detect traitors and enemies. These can be used in hospitals, when not in use elsewhere, to condition the unborn. Wait, I will show you how simple, inexpensive, and swift the operation is." He gestured to Kramer. Kramer, the muscles twitching at the corners of his mouth, looked at Jane. His eyes tried desperately to tell her that he had to obey Carroad's orders. But if he did, would he be understood? Would he be forgiven? Jane could only sit in the chair with a face as smooth and unmoving as a robot's, and allow him to decide for himself without one sign of dissent or consent from her. What, after all, could either do unless they wished to die? Kramer adjusted the controls. Even though Jane knew she would feel nothing, she trembled as if a fist were poised to strike. Bright peaks and valleys danced on the face of the oscilloscope. Carroad, watching them, gave orders to Kramer to move the prongs in minute spirals. When he had located the area he wished, he told Kramer to stop. "We have just located the exact chain of neurons which are to be altered. You will hear nothing from the speaker, because the embryo, of course, has no language. However, to show you some slight portion of service's capabilities, Kramer will stimulate the area responsible for the row waves before we begin the so-called inhibiting. Watch the scope. You'll see the waves go from a regular pulse into a wild dance." The cyclopean eye of the oscilloscope became a field of crazed lines, leaping like a horde of barefooted and wire-thin fakirs on a bed of hot coals. And a voice boomed out, "Nusay, Nusay, wanna dink?" James cried out, "God, what was that?" The secretary was startled. Kramer's face paled. Carroad was frozen. But he recovered quickly, and he spoke sharply. "Kramer, you must have shifted the prongs so they picked up James's thought." I never touched them." "Those were not my thoughts," said Jane. "Something's wrong," said Carroad needlessly. "Here, I'll do the adjusting." He bent the prongs a fraction, checked the controls, and then turned the power on again. The mechanical voice of Service spoke again. "What do you mean? What are you saying? My father's not crazy. He's a great scientist, a hero of the state. What do you mean, not any more?" The secretary leaped up from the chair and shouted above Service's voice, "What is this?" Carrow turned the machine off and said, I don't know." Jane had never seen him so shaken. "Well, find out. That's your business." Carrow's hand shook. One eye began to twitch, but he bent again to the adjustment of the dials. He directed the exceedingly narrow beam along the area from which the semantic waves originated. Only a high-pitched gabble emerged from the speaker, for Carrow had increased the speed. It was as if he were afraid to hear the normal rate of speech. Jane's eyes began to widen. A thought was dawning palely, but horribly on the horizon of her mind. If, by some intuition, she was just beginning to see the truth. But no, that could not be. But, as Carrow worked, as the beam moved, as the power was raised or lowered, so did the voice, though always the same in tone and speed, change in phrase. Carrow had slowed the speed of detection, and individual words could be heard, but it was obvious that the age level of the speaker was fluctuating. Yet, throughout the swiftly leaping sentences, there was a sameness, an identity of personality. Sometimes it was a baby just learning the language. At other times it was an adolescent or a young boy. "Well, man, what is it?" bellowed the secretary. The mysterious voice had struck sparks of even his iron nerves. Jane answered for her husband. "I'll tell you what it is. It's the voice of my unborn son." "Jane, you're insane," said Carrow. "No, I'm not, though I wish I were." "God, he's at the window," boomed the voice, "and he has a knife. What can I do? What can I do?" "Turn that off until I get through talking," said Jane. "Then you can listen again and see if what I'm saying isn't true." Carrow stood like a statue, his hand extended towards the toggle switch, but not reaching it. Kramer reached past him and flicked the switch. "James," she said, speaking slowly and with difficulty, "you want to make robots out of everyone. Except, of course, yourself and the state's leaders. But what if I told you that you don't have to do that? That nature, or God, or whatever you care to call the Creator, has anticipated you, and done so by several billion years. No, don't look at me that way. You'll see what I mean. Now look, the only one whose thoughts you could possibly have trapped is your son. Yes, it's impossible for an unborn baby to have a knowledge of speech. Nevertheless, you heard thoughts, originated by a boy, seeming to run from the first years of speech up to those of an adolescent. You have to admit that, even if you don't know what it means. Well, I do." Tears running down her cheeks, choking, she said, "Maybe I see the truth where you don't because I'm closer to my baby. It's part of me. Oh, I know you'll say I'm talking like a silly woman. Maybe. Anyway, I think that what we've heard means that we, all of humanity without exception, are machines. Not steel and electrical robots, no, but still machines of flesh, engines whose behavior, motives, and very thoughts, conscious or unconscious, spring from the playing of protein tapes in our brains."
"What the hell are you talking about?" said Carrow.
"If I'm right, we are in hell," she said, "through no fault or choice of ours. Listen to me before you shut your ears because you don't want to hear, can't hear. Memories are not recordings of what has happened in our past, nor do we act as we will. We speak and behave according to our memories, which are not recorded after the fact. They're recorded before the fact. Our actions are such because our memories tell us to do such. Each of us is set like a clockwork doll. No, not independently, but intermeshed, working together, synchronized as a master clock or master plan decrees." And all this time we think we are creatures of free will and chance. But we do not know there isn't such a thing as chance, that all is plotted and foretold, and we are sliding over the world through time in predetermined grooves. We, body and mind, are walking recordings. Deep within ourselves, a molecular needle follows the grooves, and we follow the needle. Somehow, this experiment has ripped the cover from the machine, showed us the tape, stimulated it into working long before it was supposed to. Suddenly, she began laughing, and between laughing and gasping she said, "What am I saying? It can't be an accident. If we have discovered that we're puppets, it's because we're supposed to do so."
Jane, said Carrode, "you're wild, foolish woman's intuition. You're supposed to be a scientist. Stop talking. Control yourself." The secretary bellowed for silence, and after a minute succeeded. He said, "Mrs. Carrode, please continue. We'll get to the bottom of this." He, too, was pale and wide-eyed, but he had not gotten to his position by refusing to attack. She ordered Kramer to run the beam again over the previous areas. He was to speed up the process and slow down only when she so directed. The result was a stream of unintelligibilities. Occasionally, when Kramer slowed service at a gesture from Jane, it broke into a rate of speech they could understand, and when it did, they trembled. They could not deny that they were speeding over the life thoughts of a growing male named James Carrode, Jr. Even at the velocity at which they travelled, and the great jumps in time that the machine had to make in order to cover the track quickly, they could tell that. After an hour, Jane had Kramer cut off the voice. In the silence, looking at the white and sweating men, she said, "We are getting close to the end. Should we go on?" Hoarsely the secretary shouted, "This is a hoax! I can prove it must be! It's impossible! If we carry the seeds of predeterminism within us, and yet, as now, we discover how to foresee what we shall do, why can't we change the future?" "I don't know, Mr. Secretary," said Jane. "We'll find out, in time. I can tell you this. If anyone is preset to foretell the future, he'll do so. If no one is, then the problem will go begging. It all depends on whoever wound us up." "That's blasphemy," howled the secretary, a man noted for his belligerent atheism. But he did not order the voice to stop after Jane told Kramer to start the machine up again. Kramer ran service at full speed. The words became a staccato of incomprehensibility, the oscilloscope an almost solid blur. Flickers of blackness told of broad jumps forward, and then the wild intertwined lightning resumed. Suddenly, the oscilloscope went blank, and the voice was silent. Jane Carrode said, "Backtrack a little, Jason, and then run it forward at normal speed." James Carrode had been standing before her, rigid, a figure seemingly made of white metal, his face almost as white as his uniform. Abruptly, he broke into fluidity and lurched out of the laboratory. His motions were broken, his shouts broken also. "Won't stay to listen. Rot. Mysticism. Believe this. Go insane. Mean. No control. No control." And his voice was lost as the door closed behind him. Jane said, "I don't want to hear this, Jason, but—" Instantly the voice boomed, "God, he's at the window, and he has a knife! What can I do? What can I do? Father, Father, I'm your son! He knows it, yet he's going to kill me! The window! He's breaking it! Oh, Lord! He's been locked up for 19 years, ever since he shot and killed my mother and all those men, and I was born a cesarean, and I didn't know he'd escape and still want to kill me, though they told me that's all he talked about, raving mad, and—"
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. The Builders by Foxby Holden. Originally published in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, February 1951. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Maugham flew low over the sunlit ruins and wondered idly if he would find any more in them than he had found elsewhere on the planet. "Looks as completely dead as all the rest," he said to his companion. "New City has a big enough population anyhow, as far as I'm concerned. Not that it's important, I suppose. There's always plenty of space in which to expand, but you know what I mean." The younger occupant of the low-circling aircraft nodded his understanding. "There'd be enough room on either side of the big mountains to take care of millions more of us, I guess. But I think you're right. Anyway, there isn't another nomad or ruin dweller on the planet. New City is as complete as it's going to be, and as you say, 12 million is enough. But do you think we'll find any more plans down there?" "Hard to say," Maugham answered, levelling off the aircraft for a landing. "But if there are traces of anything, I hope you'll keep your attention on what's of technical value and not waste time again on all that other stuff. None of us have ever bothered reading it. You can't build anything from it, no diagrams. To build is the only purpose of New City civilization. How could anything else be of importance?" "I've wondered off and on about that. But then, there is so little of anything left that it doesn't make much difference. Important thing is to find more diagrams." "Glad you realize it. I've been a citizen of New City ever since the first few of us on this continent started building it 40 years ago, and I can tell you, building things is all that's important. You'd realize that soon enough if you'd wandered around alone and useless, as I and a lot of other elders did for years." Maugham brought the fast twin-engined aircraft into a perfect landing, cut the power, and set the brakes. The two left their seats and started getting field equipment together. "They told us at the academy that you elders wandered so far and for so long that you had permanently lost all memory of the past. Is that really true, Maugham?" "It is. Not that it ever mattered. We all had forgotten from where we'd come and how we'd got where we were. I guess all we remembered was how to build, but then, as you said, building is all there is that's important." They left the plane and started in the direction of what once had obviously been a city. To Maugham and his young aide, the sight was nothing new. They had seen, as had all the other members of the Research Builders Division, thousands of others just like the one toward which they were now walking. Sometimes Maugham thought it would have been a lot easier to have signed up with the Production Builders Division, but that would have been dull. Always searching for new plans, building something new, that was more to his taste. The only trouble was, there seemed to be fewer and fewer new plans as the years went by. And now, even when you found some, you had to check its potentialities exhaustively before you started building it. Maugham shuddered a little when he thought of some of the first things that had been built without pre-construction study for analysis as to its probable use. One of them would have blown New City off the face of the earth had it been put into operation in a metropolitan proving lab. Fortunately, the thing had been too big and had been taken for trial to a lab located in a southern desert. Today, there was still a 10-mile-wide crater in the sand where the thing had gone off. Production never got that model from research. There were some others of similar nature that they hadn't got too. That was why, these days, even if you dug something up, you were damn careful before you built it. "Say, Maugham." "Yes?" "I was wondering about something. Eventually, we're bound to find all the plans there are. What happens when there aren't any more?" "Maybe then there'll be time for that other stuff I caught you wasting time on in the ruin we were in last week." There was a grin on Maugham's thin face. "But not until." "No, seriously, Maugham.
The Division Academy instructors said there wasn't much left, and that was why we had to be especially well trained to find what little more there is. But what about after we do, and there just isn't any more? Just build more of what we got, of course. What else would there be to do? Well, you must be right, but production sure will be dull. There was only a thin edge of the sun still separating daylight from darkness as they forced entry into their 10th ruin, and Markton's tone was dejected. "This," he said, "has been a day wasted, and there's little possibility that we'll come up with anything here. Better get out your night lamp." Markton's young assistant obeyed, and started working his way into one of the few still standing corridors. He moved cautiously, remembering his training. When exploration of ruins of shattered masonry is indicated, guard against unnecessary vibrations. The ruins yielded nothing but broken stone and twisted steel. There could, of course, be an obscured entrance to some lower level. Many amazing documents had been discovered in the almost untouched lower levels of what had seemed totally destroyed buildings when viewed only from the gutted streets. That was why it took so long to search a city. Even though there often seemed nothing left to search, there could always be some spot undetectable but intact. When he found the opening that led downward, it was necessary to go through it and descend without contacting Markton. To shout would mean dangerous vibrations, and to go back could well mean hours of delay in rediscovering his find. The night lamp pushed relentlessly against the blackness that hung stagnant in the lower level, and picked out the stumbling blocks of debris which had to be moved as smoothly as their weights could permit. Some were larger than the young researcher himself, and he realized that the going would have been a lot better had he not rationalized about contacting Markton to make whatever finds there might be on his own. There were many brick and girder-cluttered places that once had been rooms, but like so many other shattered interiors he had examined, all but stone and steel had been disintegrated by the unthinkable shockwaves that must have accompanied what awful force it had been that had wreaked such havoc on the face of an entire globe. Objects made of less sturdy stuff had been literally torn molecule from molecule, atom from atom. The chance of discovery of a complete book had been computed as a near impossibility. The finding of a complete blueprint or set of diagrams was considered almost as hopeless. To find all the pieces of a plan which had merely been shattered was about the best that could be expected. And for 40 years now, as Markton had said, it had been done by 4 million painstaking research builders. It was, in a way, amazing how so many thousands of different things had been built. The lamp's roving beam fingered something quickly, fell back into blackness, then was suddenly groping with the desperation of an almost uncontrolled excitement for what it touched and lost. It touched again. Should he find Markton now? No, not yet. Perhaps what he saw would be nothing. Pinned beneath one of the most massive steel girders he had yet seen, they were books. 4 books. Quickly, yet with his nervous system under a willed rigidity, he assembled the portable cutting torch and began freeing his 1-in-a-million find from the great length of twisted steel which held it in a vice-like hold against an embedded section of stone flooring. Minutes ticked away. More than 60 of them were gone before the books were in his hands at last. Did they hold any plans? Diagrams never seen before by research. The titles. Carefully he deciphered them from the crushed covers. A History of the World, 1800 to 1962. The Psychology of Human Relations. The Philosophies of Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. The 4th title he did not understand at all, because he could not read it. He knew only one of its 3 words, and it made even less sense than the other titles. Quickly he flipped through the volume for a possible hint of explanation, and there were diagrams, hundreds of them, and one especially beautiful one, larger than the rest. It was necessary to unfold it from the book, in colour. It was obviously the only important one of the 4 books. The others, from what it could gather from the rather vague titles, had nothing to do with building anything, but this one, with diagrams, obviously did. In a haste accompanied with what he knew to be too little caution, Markton's young aide hastened back the way he had come, sometimes stumbling in his anxiety to present his invaluable find to the elder, once almost falling. But it took only minutes until he found Markton, who was still examining the ruin on its ground level, near the large opening through which they had entered. "Markton, look!" There was an ominous rumbling sound, then a terrifying feeling of the vibration of disintegration. They bolted for the opening even as the still-standing masonry which formed it began to topple. The rumbling increased to thunder volume, and the earth outside the collapsing ruin quaked beneath their running feet. When they finally stopped at a safe distance, their night lamps showed only a slowly rising cloud of pumice and dust. "How often," Markton said when it was at last over, "do you forget the fundamentals of your basic training?" "It's done now, but the contents of whatever lower levels there may have been are lost to us for good. Nothing could have survived that, and we have never built a digging machine. There probably was nothing anyway, but next time—" Then Markton saw the book in his aide's hand. The look of disappointment on his features changed suddenly to one of disbelief, then to amazement. "At least I saved this. It has diagrams, Markton. The cave-in I caused destroyed 3 other books, but they had no drawings in them at all. Here, see if you can understand the title." "Let's get to the laboratory compartment of the plane, where we can see something. Great electrons, boy! What made you hold this back?" Under the powerful lamps in the lab compartment of their aircraft, Markton and the finder of the book puzzled over the 3 words on its cover and flyleaf. "Perhaps in one of the dictionaries at research headquarters." "No, I don't think so," Markton mused. "We'll look when we get back, but I don't think so." Doesn't make much difference. It's the diagrams that are important, and the entire book isn't incomprehensible. Lot of chemical terms, some electrical. I'm convinced already that these diagrams constitute a structure of a purely electrochemical nature, although something seems to be missing, and yet— "At the headquarters lab, we can do a lot better than we can here, Markton, or we can hand it over right away to the Research Pre-Construction Study Division." "Nothing doing. I hold a competence rating on that study business, young fellow. I'll study it for possible inherent dangers, exactly according to regulations, myself. And then whatever it is, we'll build it." "But Markton, suppose—" Markton had already seated himself at the controls of the craft, switched on the take-off lights, and started the powerful engines. Above the roar of the engines as they warmed for take-off, Markton's assistant could still detect the undertones of excitement in the elder's voice. "It's something different, completely different that you've found, not just an improved design or a variation such as we've had to be content with for the past 5 years. This is new. I'm positive of it." There was, of course, little sense in doubting the word of an elder. That was part of training. Another part which Markton's aide had not forgotten had also said, however, that there could always be danger in a too cursory pre-construction study of any new discovery. And then, of course, there were those other things that he had read which Markton had said were such a complete waste of time. They began construction work from the large coloured diagram less than a month after the book containing it had been discovered. The diagram itself, of course, had been enlarged to its full scale, and had other sectional diagrams that Markton said definitely were part of the same thing, but drawn separately in the book to render greater detail. Two things had almost stumped the elder completely, however, before he announced his pre-construction studies finished, and that he was prepared to begin actual construction. There were odours in the laboratory which his aide's nostril had never experienced before. He wondered if they were as new to Maugham. "I admit," Maugham said the day he began work on the two specially constructed oblong vats filled with a fluid Maugham called formaldehyde, "I am puzzled about the power source. Obviously a chain of electrochemical reactions, but stemming from where? That's what I've got to find out. Also, I've had to have another full-scale diagram drawn up. There was another coloured one we missed. It was on a regular page. Have a look." His aide's less experienced eyes examined the second full-scale drawing Maugham had made. "It's smaller and different, sort of, but yet it's the same. Maybe one is just an improved model over the other. One a later development, you think? Why not?" "That's what I've been wondering. But no, my studies show that neither has any greater power potential to any marked degree, that is, than the other. Both structures seem to have almost exactly the same electrochemical potentialities. But for some reason, just the same, they are different." "The original designers leave no clue in the book?" "No, just formulae, and the usual stuff we find with diagrams." "You know, Maugham, I've often wondered about whoever it was." "There you go, forgetting one of the basics of training again. Of sole importance is a discovery itself. Its origination is a thing of the past, and the past being dead is therefore of no importance." "I remember, but you have confused me, Maugham. With these two problems unresolved, can you at the same time pronounce construction a safe venture?" "I can, because neither of the unknowns is relative to the power potential which I have ascertained to be required tolerances. Neither of them are based on a framework of nuclear physics anyway, and I have discovered no possibility of chemical reaction which would render anything than a slow oxidation process. Therefore, youngster, to solve for the two unknown quantities, power source and construction variation, we must build." Maugham was an elder, so the trace of excitement in his voice was excusable. His decision was not to be questioned. Yet, "Maugham, I have a peculiar feeling about this." "A peculiar what?" "Well, Are you questioning my pre-construction study?" Maugham's tone was suddenly flat, yet charged with authority. "Of course not, sir." "Here are untried, absolutely new diagrams. We must build. That is our purpose. Now we will begin. The larger one first, I think." They laboured on the project for 3 months. They finished the structure in the large vat first, and Maugham left the job of completing the smaller one to his assistant while he drained the larger vat of its original fluid, dried the completed structure, and placed a series of L-type electrodes at various spots on its exterior. "The smaller one came out to look quite a lot different, Maugham. I'll have it ready for the first series of charges by the time you have that one going. I don't understand, however, what good the charges will do when there isn't any power source to activate." "Making either of them work might be a problem, but somehow I don't think so," Maugham replied. "The whole setup, devoid of any central power unit as it seems to be, is designed in such a way that electrochemical reactions of some sort should take place with the first series of charges. A few rearrangements of electrodes might be necessary." During the next 4 hours, Maugham's assistant worked with extra speed, so that he was able to have the smaller vat drained and the electrode placement diagrammed for his own use. "Through what process of logic," he asked Maugham as he neared his last set of adjustments, "did you make your decision concerning a primary charge for the inducement of the electrochemical reactions of which you spoke?" "You may inscribe in your apprentice journal," the elder said as he prepared a dynamo for use, that insofar as the logic of the situation was concerned, I simply applied the physical truth that an object at rest tends to remain at rest until acted upon by some outside force. Since the objects in this case are ingredients of a chemical nature specifically constructed for electrical conduction, the only possible solution is to activate them through application of an electromotive force. If the logic had been faulty, of course. Maugham paused a moment. Then we will know that there has simply been an error in construction. However, we have been precise in every step. They will work. What they will do, naturally, rests in theory. Something of an electrical nature in accordance with your logic, correct? Precisely. And if I'm wrong, and they prove of no use at all, we'll dismantle them and inform research library that any further such diagrams discovered are worthless. The assistant straightened from his work. Finished? Maugham asked. I am. You know, though, even though they aren't exactly the same, they have a peculiar similarity too. We built according to specifications. Ready? Go ahead, Maugham. Maugham first reduced the penetrating power of the laboratory operation lamps to a subdued softness. The smooth metal walls of the rectangularly shaped laboratory seemed to melt away to nothingness, and most of the bluish light was focused on the contents of the two vats. Maugham pressed a control. There was no sound as the electrical impulses surged through the structures they had made, and the silence itself seemed a part of their stillness. There was a faint odour now of ozone. Maugham glanced at dials. Try a temperature test. See if the materials are withstanding the amperage. I will cut the current at your signal. Maugham's assistant obeyed. I don't understand, he said. At completion they were room temperature, 68.7 calibrations. Now exactly 98.6 calibrations. Yet the resistance of their chemical constituents would not warrant. Any damage? Tissue breakdown? None I can see. Maugham, the big one moved. Then the smaller one moved too. Both of them sat up. For the moment Maugham and his aide looked only at each other, the younger of the two speechless, incredulity on his features. Maugham smiled. I was not sure, he said, but as you said, they do appear similar to us. They are chemical automatons. I suspected, but of course could not be sure. Now we must discover the exact power source, and, more importantly, the control centers of the things. Then... But on these counts, Maugham was doomed to disappointment. Aside from his discovery that the things he had created would not function properly without ingesting large amounts of different types of vegetable and organic materials, and that they operated independently of any outside stimulus, he was able to discover nothing more. Except when at length he had concluded that neither of the things could be of any use to the populace of New City, because they could be neither electrically or mechanically directed by any type of control yet built, he discovered that they actually resisted any attempts to dismantle them. They ran. Peculiar, he said. Shall I pursue them? His apprentice asked. They appear to be heading in the direction of the grasslands to the north. Never mind, Maugham sounded dejected. They have very low unit power potential. They could never do any harm to anything. I wish we knew what those 3 words on the book meant. Advanced human anatomy. Nothing too important, really. Or we'd have known their meaning. Well, there will be other things to build, and we need energy. Let's go to maintenance and recharge our plates. Good thought. I guess those things wouldn't have been strong enough to build anything anyway. At any rate, they can't be dangerous.
The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. The Maugham Obsession,
by August Derleth, originally published in Fantastic Universe, June-July 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. "It's always been a moot point with me," said Harrigan one evening over a glass of sherry at the Cliff Dwellers Club, "whether or not there is such a thing as a man's being too successful. I always think of Quintus Maugham." "You have the advantage of me," I said. "By rights he should have been famous," Harrigan went on, warming to his subject. "But things don't always work out that way. He was a plodding inventor, obsessed by an idea. What inventor isn't given a modicum of success? Perhaps he was a product of his time, for Maugham's obsession was robots." "The principle's sound enough." "Oh, yes. It could be practical, too. After all, machines have been operated by mechanical men or mechanical brains for years. So Maugham's idea wasn't out of line. The operation didn't work out according to Hoyle, however. Maugham was one of those gaunt, earnest men, a tall fellow with deep-set eyes and a habitually grim mouth. He took himself very seriously, and you were always just a little embarrassed when he tried to explain something to you. You felt that he so badly wanted your understanding." He paused and sipped his sherry, looking reflectively out over the silvery lake. "Where'd you meet him?" I asked. "On assignment?" "Oh, he'd invented a little gadget connected with a recoil mechanism for the military, so I was sent over to his place for an interview. The usual thing. He lived in a nice old house in Oak Park, left him by his mother, and he lived pretty well, if a little on the frugal side. He was considerate and courteous, which is a damn sight more than you can say for most of the people a reporter gets to see. He gave me everything I wanted to know, and a good deal more besides. He wound up with a half-apologetic question about his newest invention. Would I like to see it? I said I would, so he took me down into one of the most elaborate private laboratories I've ever seen and introduced me to Harmon. "Ah, another character," I said, pouring more sherry into his glass. Harmon was his robot, a neat, well-oiled, scrupulously clean mechanical man in the process of being born. He was run by electrical impulses and was a good deal more self-sufficient than the traditional push-button robot of an earlier day. Even though he wasn't quite born yet, Harmon did a turn or two for us, up and down the laboratory, with a precision that was almost military. Unlike most robots of that day, Harmon had a physiognomy carefully moulded after a human face. He looked damnably real. He could blink his glass eyes, he could shake hands, he could nod, and because of the mobility of his plastic rubber face, he could even smile after a fashion, though I always thought his smile a little grim. "The next step is to make him talk," Maugham said. "I believe it can be done." "Can he hear?" I asked. "That will come," he said. He seemed so sure of himself that I was almost inclined to believe him, until, of course, I remembered all the others who had been so sure of themselves. That seems to be a characteristic of my queer people. Each one has an unlimited belief in his own particular delusion. Well, Maugham put Harmon through his paces, and it was certainly novel to watch. He asked me not to write anything about Harmon for publication, and I didn't. I figured I owed him that courtesy. He had great plans for Harmon, he explained. He meant Harmon to be his general factotum, and planned to perfect the robot as the housewife's dream. If I had had to guess, I'd have said he might accomplish as much. Well, I examined Harmon inside and out. It was uncanny, the resemblance he bore to a human being. It was Maugham's conceit to duplicate as nearly as possible the organs and characteristics of the human body. That still left room for the complicated machinery necessary. The skeleton was of steel, with a plastic overlay carefully moulded into the shape of a man approximately 6 feet high and weighing about 200 pounds. Over the entire structure he had stretched a kind of plastic rubber made to resemble human skin in colour and texture. There were doors in both front and back, of course, to allow Maugham to service his robot, inspect the machinery, charge and replace the batteries, oil the parts, and so forth. He could almost have patented that as a bachelor's companion, I suggested. Harrigan took another draught of sherry and smiled reminiscently. His enthusiasm was infectious until I got out into the open air and started thinking about Hermon's practicability. Then, of course, Hermon slid back to his proper plane, and I saw Maugham in a more balanced perspective. He struck me then as another little man with ideas just a trifle too big for them. In the ordinary course of events, I wouldn't have seen Maugham again, but about a month later he came up with another of those military valuable gadgets, and I went out to get a propaganda story for Army intelligence. I thought that at the time that Maugham looked a little harassed, but he was as cooperative as before when he knew what I wanted, and he came through with just the right stuff for Army intelligence. After we had finished, I naturally asked, "And how's Hermon?" He brightened a little, and said that Hermon was coming along fine. Forthwith he left the room and came back with his robot. He had put clothes on him, and for a minute, candidly, I didn't know it was Hermon. Maugham came up behind him, and Hermon said, "Good day, master." Of course, his voice had a flat sort of scratchy sound, like a phonograph, and there was no inflection of any kind, but it was undeniably speech. "Can he hear?" I asked. Maugham nodded. "He responds to an auditory mechanism very similar in principle to an electric eye, but is far from perfect, Mr. Harrigan, very far." "I'd say he was pretty good myself," I said. But Maugham only shook his head. "What's the trouble?" I asked. "He's too mechanical," said Maugham. "You couldn't expect him to be human." "No, but a little more human than he is," Maugham answered. I had my doubts, but I kept them to myself. After all, I'm just a reporter. I've seen a lot of things I never dreamed were possible, but none of them has warped my objectivity. Perhaps he could make a Hermon more human, but I doubted that he could. Hermon looked as human as a typical product of the Prussian military machine. If he'd come in saluting and saying Heil Hitler, you could almost have believed in his humanity, if you'd call it that, all things considered. So I held my tongue and watched Hermon. That robot could move around and get things for Maugham: an ashtray, his bedroom slippers, a tray with a decanter and glasses on it. He could dust things, but he was pretty awkward at that, and now and then knocked something over. Maugham had removed all the breakables, I noticed, so no harm was done. I saw Maugham watching Hermon with undeniable triumph and self-satisfaction, but nevertheless there was an undercurrent of doubt in his eyes. He never said a thing, however, to follow through. It was just in the way I felt, as if this triumph and self-satisfaction were somehow watered by some question he did not care to voice. I knew intuitively, too, that whatever it was could not readily be drawn from him. But I felt it like something tangible, and curiously, which is a testimony to his inventive skill, I felt it to be something personal between him and his robot. Just what was going on in his mind it was impossible for me to find out, of course. Maugham congratulated himself in his ability to maintain his composure in the face of the reporter's interest. He was definitely uneasy about Hermon, and was only now, after Harrigan had gone, that he relaxed a little. For one thing, Hermon's responses were not quite what they should be, not so much on the negative side as on the positive. After Harrigan had gone, he eyed Hermon for some time in profound perturbation. If Maugham had to put his finger on the trouble, he would be compelled to say that Hermon was becoming somewhat too human for his own good. His own attitude toward Hermon was considerably more that of one man to another than of inventor to invention. It was not, thought Maugham, a good thing. It meant that Hermon was in the process of becoming no longer just an invention, but an obsession. Hermon, meanwhile, stood immobile, waiting upon his command. Harmon, go to the laboratory, said Maugham, enunciating each syllable with the clarity necessary for the precision machinery which was Hermon's ear. Was there hesitation in Hermon's obedience? Maugham could not be sure, and this very uncertainty troubled him all the more. But once moving, Harmon went forward with his customary smoothness, marching straight down to the laboratory and waiting there for Maugham, in whose breast pride was once more swelling at this concrete evidence of his inventive ingenuity. He recognized that Harmon was indeed almost as perfect a machine as it was possible for man to conceive and bring into being. He had some question now as to whether he could improve on Harmon or not, or whether indeed it would be wise, but his ambition overcame his qualms, and marshalling Harmon, he went to work. The next time I ran into Maugham, I saw a badly jangled man, said Harrigan. For one thing, he looked as harassed as any man who has ever nagged by his ball and chain. For another, he found it seemingly impossible to talk freely. "You're not looking so well," I said to him. "No," he agreed. "I've been working." "On Harmon?" "I've worked on him enough," he said ominously. I confess, I wasn't particularly observant that morning. I knew something was bothering him, but I knew too, as if by instinct, that he wasn't saying anything about it. I couldn't resist having a little fun with him. "Look," I said, "if you scientists get around to inventing life, would it be necessary to rewrite the Bible?" He blinked at me, a little startled. "Why, no," he said. "We're not in conflict with the Bible. It's organized religion that's in conflict with us." "And the creation of life has nothing to do with it?" "I always thought that all conflicts and arguments came back to that basic point. Who was responsible? A supreme being, or a process of evolution from dead matter?" "Listen," he said, "why are you asking me all this?" I noticed then how extremely nervous he was. He had taken hold of my arm, and I could feel his hands trembling. "I'd like to know," I answered, "but it's not that important. Forget it. I'm a little dubious about the scientists anyway. Whether you worship science or God sometimes gets to seem like 6 of one and a half dozen of the other. Or do you think it's possible to create life, Maugham?" "I wonder," he said, and nothing else. All this time we had been walking along to his place. I noticed that his steps began to lag a trifle, and the closer we got to his home, the slower he walked. I gathered finally that for some reason he was reluctant about my coming, but was much too courteous to say so. "As long as we're so close to your place," I said at last, "I might as well stop in and take another look at Harmon." He stopped short at that, and showed his distress pretty plainly. A newspaper man has to be impervious to most emotion, and I guess I was. I didn't bat an eyelash, and let on when I never saw a thing. "I don't know in what shape the house is in," he said then. "I've forgotten just what I set Harmon to doing." "Well, we'll see," I said. We went in. Maugham led the way, jittery as a confirmed tosspot too long gone without a drink. "Which reminds me," I put in, "will you have another, Harrigan?" "Sure, but find something stronger," he said. Well, we went in, as I said. I don't know what I had expected to see, but there was nothing unusual about the place. It was spick and span. You'd think he had a housemaid working on it all day. And as for Harmon, he was sitting in the living room in an easy-chair that was clearly enough Maugham's own favourite. Maugham stared at his creation as if he hadn't expected to see him there. "Harmon," he said, "go to the laboratory." The robot got up without a sound. I had expected to hear creaks, the meshing of gears, or something, and walked out of the room. Maugham sat down. I could see that he was sweating, but he seemed relieved about something. "He looks perfected," I said. "He's a very serviceable robot," Maugham agreed. "He certainly did himself proud on this room." "You mean he cleaned it?" I asked. "Every foot of it," he answered. "I gave him his orders before I left the house." "But I thought you didn't know what you'd find, or what you'd set him doing." "Oh, I knew all right. What I didn't know was what Harmon might get to do. He's not quite perfect yet, you see, Mr. Harrigan." I saw all right. I saw that Harmon had become his inventor's obsession in a very real sense. I felt sorry for him, but I had known enough inventors to understand what had happened. They work so much alone, they're apt to overemphasize the importance of their work. The same thing holds true for authors and composers, I suppose. They lose perspective. It's little more than that. And my friend Maugham seemed to have lost his. Maugham was relieved at Harrigan's going. He sat for a few moments after the door had closed behind the reporter. But in the moment his relief gave way before an attitude of listening. Was there movement? Did he hear shuffling footsteps? Or was it again his imagination? He walked across to the door through which Harmon had disappeared. There he stood for a moment more, listening. He was undeniably nervous. He wondered whether Harrigan had seen or not. In final analysis, perhaps, it made no difference. He opened the door. Harmon stood there, immobile. For a ludicrous moment, Maugham thought that his robot had been listening at the door, even as he himself had been. But of course that was impossible. If only he could remember what he had done to Harmon the last time he had worked on the complicated and delicate mechanism of the robot. He was convinced that something had happened, something which had given Harmon considerably more animation than had been either planned or foreseen. There was, of course, one solution, though he hesitated to resort to it, since it involved undoing everything he had done. He could take Harmon apart again, and find out just how he functioned so well. He would have been ashamed to confess to Harrigan or anyone else that he was candidly perplexed at Harmon's abilities. He stepped across the threshold, brushing past the motionless robot, and turned at the door to the laboratory stairs. "Come, Harmon," he said. The robot did not move. "Harmon, go to the laboratory," said Maugham in a firm, clear voice. Still no move. He remembered abruptly that he had given Harmon this order before when Harrigan was still in the house. Apparently then Harmon had not obeyed the order at that time. Something was wrong with the auditory mechanism. He came back to the robot's side and tried once more. Harmon's mechanical arms came up. His fingers opened and closed on Maugham's arms. He held him immobile. "Stop!" commanded Maugham angrily. Harmon held on. "Put me down," said Maugham. Harmon released him. His arms once again fell laxly to his sides. He stood there, unblinking, apparently waiting upon his next command. "Go to the laboratory," said Maugham again. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the robot's head turned and shook his refusal. Maugham stared, aghast. He was at a loss for word or deed. "I never saw Maugham around again after that," continued Harrigan. "He virtually went into seclusion, and no one saw him at his old haunts. Not that he'd been in the habit of moving around a good deal. He hadn't. But now, abruptly, he appeared to give up all his customary walks and visits and to retire into his house. You get used to situations like that involving inventive or creative people, of course. You think nothing of it. I didn't, I know, though I was possessed of some curiosity about Harmon. But out in his neighbourhood, where people knew nothing about Harmon, certain rumours began to circulate that Maugham had hired an assistant, and that the assistant now did all Maugham's errands for him, and so on. I happened on a description of his assistant one afternoon, and it sounded pretty much like Harmon. I was amused at the way in which people can get things balled up. They do, you know. Take any court, any trial. The so-called circumstantial evidence, correctly interpreted, is the most effectively damning. Eyewitness accounts vary as much as the weather and are as unreliable, actually. So that too passed over me. I think it was about 2 months after I had last seen Maugham that I learned of his plans to move west. It was entirely an accident. I happened to be in the circulation department one morning when the circulation manager of the paper got a letter from Maugham asking him to change his address. "You know that fellow Maugham, don't you, Harrigan?" asked Howells. "Sure," I said. "What's he been up to now?" "Don't know. He's moving away." He gave me the change of address as of the 1st of the coming month. I looked at his crisp letter and saw that Maugham was planning to pull up stakes for the West. It had the look of pretty isolated country in Nevada. It was only a week until the 1st, and I thought that if I had time I'd look in on Maugham before I went. So next morning, being in the neighbourhood, I went out of my way a little to call on him. I rang his bell several times before I got an answer. Then it was only the tentative opening of the door on a chain. Maugham's head appeared in the opening. "Good morning," I said. "How's the inventing business?" "You'll have to ask Mr. Maugham," he said. "That's just what I'm doing," I said. "Oh, yes. Well, I'm busy now," he answered. I could see that he was. He was wearing some sort of cap, as if to keep his hair dust-free. He was carrying a broom, and he had an apron tied around his middle. Plainly he was getting ready to take his leave. Remembering his agitation at our last meeting, I looked for more of the same. But instead, there was only a kind of weary apathy. If he was nervous at sight of me, he didn't show it. I could see that he didn't intend to let me in if he could help it, and this time the chain across the door was an argument I couldn't very well get around. "How's Harmon?" I asked. "I'm fine," he said in a flat voice. "Harmon," I said, "your robot." "Oh, yes," he answered. "Harmon's fine. He can do just about everything now." "Well, in that case, it's up to you to invent a mate for him," I said. He grinned in a sickly way and started to back into the house. "Hold on," I cried. "What's all this about you going to Nevada?" "We're leaving next week," he said. "Change of air, change of scene." "Are you taking Harmon?" I asked. "Certainly. It's for his benefit." "Oh, I see. He's still not quite perfect." He shook his head and echoed, "Not quite perfect," in a voice as flat as that of his robot. "Are you going to perfect him?" I asked. "Would you?" he asked. "Sure," I said. "I'd make him better and better." "Beyond one point you couldn't go," he said. "And what's that?" "You couldn't give him a soul, unless you could slip him your own," he said. This time he did back well into the house. I stuck my foot into the doorway so that he couldn't close the door. At the same time I got a glimpse past him. His front door opened directly into his main room, his living room, and I could see that someone was standing there waiting for him. A tallish fellow, with one arm folded across his chest and supporting his elbow, one hand cupping his chin. He seemed impatient, but of course I couldn't see that clearly. If it hadn't been so absurdly impossible, I'd have sworn the fellow was Harmon. But of course it was undoubtedly Maugham's new assistant. For once, the local gadabouts had the story straight. "And did he move?" I asked. "Oh, yes. He went on schedule, with his assistant. I don't know what became of Harmon in the Exodus. Presumably he moved with them because he turned up in Nevada with Maugham, but I saw no sign of him when I watched Maugham from a distance boarding the train. I suppose Harmon could have been taken apart and shipped on ahead. Then it could have been reassembled and set to working again. "But how do you know Harmon went along to Nevada?" I asked, pouring Harrington yet another drink. "By one of those ridiculous mistakes the newspapers sometimes make. Maugham hadn't been out west 2 months before a flash flood tore through the village in which he'd set up housekeeping and inventing. Maugham was one of the victims. The paper nearest there carried a picture of Maugham and his robot, which by that time was public property out there. But by one of those odd accidents of the press, the names under the pictures had been transposed. Under Harmon's picture appeared Maugham's name, and under Maugham's, Harmon's. And to carry the mistake to the epitome of ludicrous, I'm damned if Maugham didn't look exactly like a robot, and Harmon just like a man."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories or futures past. You know, many of these stories were written in a time where 50 years ago was in the future.